afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla Abreu and I'm Community and Program Manager at Singularity University, Portugal, working together with Nova Business School of Economics in this initiative. I have the pleasure once more to be your host for today's webinar, an initiative that is part of the Role to Play campaign promoted by Nova SPE that aims to help our community to deal with the several challenges in the current context. Today, we have the presence of Osioma Eguanon from Singularity University, Portugal. She is our transformation expert that today will be talking about reinventing the future, leading transformative possibilities. A reflection of how can we deal with the mindset change strategies and resources that will enable us to reinvent the future, especially in time like this when we have more questions than answers. Before we start, some technical issues. Feel free to use the Q&A area present in the bottom of your screen to ask your questions that will be answered in the end of this session. The chat is mainly used for technical issues. And now, to learn more about the topic of this session, I leave you with Osioma.
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you. And also thank all of you for attending this session. I'm looking forward to being able to share some insights and some inspiration, as well as very important information that's going to support the way in which you move forward into the future. And so this information is relevant, whether it's just you coming for yourself, if you're coming on behalf of your team that you work with, or if you're actually looking to reinvent the way in which your entire organization does business. This will definitely serve. So without further ado, let's get started. I want to start actually with a quote from who many people consider is the founder of modern day management. And he says, Peter Drucker says, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think it is so relevant for our times right now because every single one of us have the invitation to truly step forward, to recreate and to reinvent possibility. But this isn't the first time that this has happened specifically in our world and also in the location that many of us find ourselves around, right? This time when we think we're kind of like, wow, we've never experienced something like this. But we can look out throughout history when there have been times when there's been moments, just like the 1755 earthquake in Lisbon, where it was as if we just were blindsided and we saw that, it felt like we were being hit from one direction to the other. And in this case, an earthquake came and then a tsunami and then a fire. And in that moment, the landscape of what is modern, at that time was modern day Lisbon, transformed. And they had the opportunity to actually recreate the city as it was or to create something different. In fact, there were 4 different plans for what Lisbon would actually become. One was exactly to create the city that it stood before. The second and third plan were actually just to make the roads wider. And the fourth was to say, you know what, let's raise Baixa, let's actually transform the landscape. And that is how modern Lisbon was created. So this art of reinvention, which we know is nothing new, is also conceived as one of the most important critical skills of our century. And this was from an article by Yuval Noah Harari who's written so many books, Sapiens, Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And so this art of reinvention, and it truly is an art, is going to be so critical for the way that we move forward into the future. And it's not going to be a one and done art. It's going to actually be something that we know that is a reinvention cycle. Cycles and cycles and cycles of reinvention. And so when we look at reinvention, we look at a cycle of reinvention, there's many people who have been kind of really digging into how do we actually reinvent. And I want to share with you just one example of one model of reinvention, which comes from the Chief Reinvention Officer, Nadia Shixmabaya, and the community that we are a part of called the Reinvention Society. And so it's really about how do we anticipate change, how do we design it, and then how do we implement it. And as we are anticipating what is coming, knowing that we can't really predict the future, and then we are designing this transformation and implementing it, we're seeing that our mindset is shifting, the culture of our organizations, of our own personal culture, the world, right? And the systems themselves are also transforming. So reinvention is a continual process that is not one and done. It is truly a way in which we shift our mindset, we shift our culture, and we shift our systems. But this specific moment, when we think about the challenges that we face, we can look at examples that have serve the test of time and can actually point to different ways in which we can look at the moment we're in. I've been doing a lot of webinars and seminars and consultations around this what I call a three-part response framework to this moment, which is all about rising up and getting a bit of like separation from the challenge that you may be facing in your life, in your organization, in our world, and then being able to say, okay, once we move from the current day to day and we kind of turn to the vision of possibility, we then begin to reimagine and we say, what is possible as it relates to my business? What is possible as it relates to my team? What is possible as it relates to what is possible in this moment in our world? And then from that big picture of vision is where we actually reinvent. And the inspiration we take is actually from an organization, right? A business that during 9/11 could no longer actually sell its prize, I guess, Swiss Army knives that it had become known for, had to go. And they had the opportunity to say, you know what, should we just close and fire a whole bunch of people? Or should we actually turn to our employees, get their ideas, and then come back stronger? And that's exactly what Victorinox did, right? And now you see the way in which they actually reinvented their entire business model and where they source their abundance from. Everything now, not just Swiss Army knives, but cutlery, fragrances, watches, travel gear. And so that's the way in which many of us now need to think. More expansive as it relates to how we think about the future. But how do we do that? And so what I wanted to do was to share a framework, right? One of the most inspiring frameworks that I actually love when it comes to thinking about the future. And this comes from a consultant and a strategist who I admire called Hardin Tibbs. And in his article, he talks about this notion that the future itself is a landscape. So as you're listening to me, I want you to kind of tune into, because in the Q&A, I'll be able to answer some of these questions. How do you envision the future? And if it was a landscape, how do you see it? And how do you see yourself, where you are today with your values, your attributes? Your team also has values and attributes. Your organization has values and attributes. And before that, as you look out, you see that there's this chessboard, these issues and challenges that you're most likely going to face. And then there's the mountain, the hopes that you desire to achieve. And then, of course, in the distance is that enduring, what he calls the enduring social guiding social role. But if we take it into the world of exponentials, right, the world and the language that we live in here in the Singularity University Portugal, Singularity U Portugal, we have this notion of the MTP, right, the massive transformative purpose, which is beyond just a vision and a mission, right? It's something that truly galvanizes you, your team, your organization, that you're truly committed to making happen. And then there's the moonshot, right, that bold, audacious goal. And then there's the field of action, right? The spaces and the place and the systems where the emotions, the thoughts, all the challenges, as well as the opportunity lives. And then there's you, your team, right? Your organization as agents of transformation. And that is the way in which we begin to look at our local selves and we look out into the future and say, what is the possibility? And this is more importantly about leadership. How you rise to the occasion, how your team comes together to engage in what we know is more and more common today, shared leadership. And how do we navigate the challenges that we experience today so that we can begin to chart the course towards an even more powerful, dynamic future? And I believe that reinvention is truly a process that invites us to engage our individual and collective exponential potential. And that's a term that we've often spoken about, right? This exponential curve, right? And there's this deception, right? We are here in this moment and we look out into the future and we assume the future is just going to be incrementally better or different. And it's very linear. The human mind thinks so linearly. But exponential, right, growth and exponential transformation is where chaos obviously can live, but it's also where amazement lives. It's where possibility can truly be unleashed. Just like that in an instant. And unfortunately in this moment, many people who didn't understand what exponential growth was because of this, COVID-19, we now know what it's like to see this doubling factor come out of nowhere. And suddenly our realities are transformed. We're working from home, right? We can't come close to some of our elderly. Things have changed and it changed exponentially. But we've been talking about exponentials for a while in the world of technology. And now it's really time for us to also think about what are the models And how can we conceive of this exponential opportunity that we have? And so I've created a model for us to kind of wrap our minds around. And it truly is a model that speaks to the times that we are in. Here we are as agents of transformation with this exponential potential, right? What's possible in my life? What's possible in my business? What's possible for our team? What's possible for our world? And then if we are able to engage in an exponential transformation process, whereby which we are in the field of action, we are shifting the spaces, the places, the systems. And as a result of really engaging in these transformative practices and processes, which I'm going to speak to you about momentarily, we then unleash a wave of exponential possibilities. And that is when we get to this notion of a new reality. New situations arise, new solutions arise, new stories arise, and everything transforms. So welcome to the Exponential Potential Movement. And this is set against the backdrop of the fourth industrial revolution. And if we think about how each industrial revolution transformed reality, we see how in the first one, it was all about steam power, mechanization. And in the second industrial revolution, it was about mass production, right? The assembly lines and the power of electricity. The third was about robotics, but really about computing and the power of computing. And the fourth today, we keep talking about how things are getting smarter and more connected. And yes, it is about connection, but it is also about what we call convergence. And Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler wrote this amazing book, which I highly recommend, called The Future is Faster Than You Think. And it is about the way in which these converging technologies transform our businesses, industries, and our lives. But it's not just about these technologies, right? It's about how we can also converge and connect with these technologies, but also how we connect to one another and leverage these exponential technologies to create transformational waves that truly change everything. Because many of the challenges that we face today are not going to be solved in a linear approach. You know, at Singularity U Portugal and Singularity University overall, we have these global grand challenges. And the world writ large, you've been hearing about it, right? The Sustainable Development Goals. You know, we are not at a shortage of challenges that our world has. And there is a huge opportunity for us to engage connection and convergence to create a new future. But the question is, what kind of future are we actually advancing? Is it a utopian future where we're like, oh my gosh, everything's going to be amazing. It's like the Jetsons. It's amazing, you know? Or is it really like dystopia, right? Like the worst version of The Matrix, which is one of my favorite movies, or, you know, Blade Runner. Is it that kind of future that we're thinking we're all going to inherit? You know, some of the things that Greta has spoken about, right? Is that the world that we truly are working towards creating? Or is it more like what Kevin Kelly calls the protopian future? The idea of us just moving in a particular direction and doing our best and trying to make the future just a bit better, maybe exponentially better as we take these steps, right? Because we can take linear steps or we can take exponential steps. But if we take exponential steps committed to creating a better world, not necessarily a utopian world, or not, you know, operating in fear of a dystopian world, but a protopian world, there's so much that's possible. And I believe that there are 4 key transformative shifts that will impact the way in which we get to the future that we all know could be so much more powerful if we get started today. And this moment that we're in, even though it is an uncertain moment, there is so much opportunity that we have. So I'm going to share with you right now the 4 key shifts that I believe is important not only for individuals, but also for the context of team and the context of our organizations, our communities, the world. The first shift is the shift of mindset, moving from what's known as a fixed mindset that believes that intelligence, personality, character is static and locked and fixed, and that my potential is determined at birth. It doesn't change. I am who I am. I'm just not good at this. I never was good at this. It'll never change. And I'm avoiding challenges because I don't want to have to show that I don't know this and I don't know that. And you can imagine how this impacts the way in which our organizations operate. But really shifting from that fear-based kind of fixed perspective to one that is more liberating and liberated. You know, what Dr. Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset, where belief in the intelligence, personality, character can be continuously developed, right? My true potential is unknown and unknowable. At any given moment, My team, my organization, we can operate differently. We can transform. We will embrace challenges, and we're not afraid to fail. This is the kind of mindset that more and more organizations are embracing. And there is a path for us to get there, right? All of these attributes that have been found out in the research over the years. The second shift is a shift from motivation, moving from what's known primarily as extrinsic motivation to intrinsic motivation, right? So often in our organizations, we're afraid. We're like, oh, I'm moving towards either away from wanting to be punished, or I'm moving towards the reward, the carrot, the stick. Let's go. More money. But at the end of the day, that doesn't bring more satisfaction. So as we move towards more intrinsic motivation and we cultivate that within our organizational systems, we start to see that mastery emerges, purpose-driven operation emerges, as well as more autonomy. And this is the type of work, and this is the type of culture and leadership that we want to cultivate. The third shift is a shift in our models. More often than not, people are talking about, is there a way for us to move from what's known as a stakeholder model to more of a shareholder model, where we're looking at the different shareholders that are part of our system, right? Our employees, our distributors, and so on and so forth. And another model is this idea of the quadruple bottom line, which before was a triple bottom line, right? People, planet, and what people called profit. And now they're saying, why don't we bring purpose into that? Because if we bring purpose into that, then it will change the way we lead, it'll change our culture systems, and it'll all change our governance systems. And we see that again and again as more and more organizations embrace the co-creation of massive transformative purpose, individually and collectively. And the fourth shift that needs to be made is a shift in our methods, really moving from what is known as routine expertise and routine type leadership to what is known as adaptive leadership, adaptive expertise, realizing that we need to get very good at problem solving. We need to be very good at using different tools to address the challenges at hand. And Gartner, in late 2019, issued this kind of statement in one of their pieces, that constant upskilling and digital dexterity will outweigh tenure and experience. So being able to quickly and rapidly and continuously reinvent, right, upskill and with your digital dexterity is going to outweigh how long you've been at a job or how much experience you have, because guess what? Much of what you had experience in is outdated so quickly. So by 2028, the most high value work will be cognitive in nature, and employees will have to apply creativity, critical thinking, and constant digital upskilling to solve complex problems. And so this model of mindset, motivations, methods, and models, and shifting that is important. And so I want to leave you, before we move into Q&A, into looking at this framework and the questions you have to start, or I invite you don't have to do anything, but I invite you, and I hope that you will begin to ask yourself, you'll begin to explore within your teams, and you'll also begin to invite your organizations to engage with, which is, how will we shift from fixed to growth mindset? What are the practices and the rituals within our organization that will foster that? How will we shift from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation? How can we really get people in touch with their own passions, and how can that align with the purpose of the organization? And what is the massively transformative purpose of the team that you're in, you yourself as an individual, your organization? Invite, who's at play and who's at stake to participate in the co-creation of one. It's an amazing exercise. How will we shift from status quo driven models to positive transformation driven models? And how will we shift from routine to adaptive expertise and leadership? And what I want to do actually before we move into this is I want to backtrack, because I thought I didn't have time, but there's one particular framework that I think is really important when we start to think about adaptive leadership and adaptive, being able to address challenges. And this is called the Cynefin framework. And it's by an amazing individual and thinker called Dave Snowden. And he talks about that we really need to get better at identifying what types of problems we're trying to solve, what kinds of decisions that need to be made. And if it's a decision or a challenge that's pretty clear, then we already know what the best practices are, and we're focused on trying to focus on what are the best practices and implement those. If the challenge is complicated, then we look to our governing constraints, right? What are our rules? What are our procedures? And our process is really about sensing, analyzing, and responding. And it's about good practices. But if the challenge is complex, we need to be able to probe. We need to be able to sense and respond. And there, it's about enabling constraints, right? Really being able to engage in ideation processes, right? And really explore what's known as exaptive. Before, at one point, it was called emergent. But exaptive is about how you actually create things and use things that actually weren't for their original use. So you're like, oh, we thought we were going to use this capacity in our organization for this, but we discovered that because of this complex challenge, we now had to deploy our team. Maybe the innovation team is doing something different, or vice versa. And then finally, chaotic, right? Wherever there are no effective constraints, you don't really know what's happening. So you have to totally create new novel practices. And that's all about taking action, sensing, and then responding. And the fifth dimension that most people forget about when it comes to this framework is what's at the center, which is AC, which essentially is about sometimes being confused and sometimes being in doubt. And at the center, there may be that doubt and that confusion, and that's also okay. And so frameworks like this allow us to be able to explore how do we address challenges and how do we get better at being okay with not knowing, which is going to be more and more important in the future. And so now that I've shared some of these insights with you, I just really want to remind us and just invite us to remember that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. It's one of my favorite quotes. And so go forth, dream big, and reinvent the future.
Well, thank you, Ozioma. I think we could be here hours talking about transformative change, the advantages and all the things that are that we can do when we really want to change. So let's now just pass to the Q&A. First question. We talk about transformation, change, and future. Do you think that creativity is a skill that helps individuals and companies to reinvent themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about some of the organizations and the leaders that we still, honor and speak about today, like, Steve Jobs. If you even look at like Microsoft and Satya Nadella, the reinvention of Microsoft would not be possible without creativity, right? When we think about new products and new services, all of that is based off of the creative capacities of individuals, teams, and the organization, as well as the permission to be able to be creative. Because many organizations, the culture is such that they feel that they don't have permission to be creative. But when you give that permission, so much more becomes possible. So my answer is a resounding yes.
Yeah, good. Another question. How do you think that culture aspects, especially the national culture, can build upon this framework and improve companies to survive competition?
Whoa, that's a mouthful. Please repeat that question.
How do you think that culture aspects, especially the national culture, can build up this framework and improve companies to survive competition? It's a mainly issue about culture.
So, I mean, there's so many different models of culture, right? Most often people say culture is like the way we do things around here. And so every single culture has its own orientation, right? Portugal has its own orientation. My original culture of Nigeria, America has its own orientation. And some of those orientations, those cultural orientations, support the innovation of business, right? America has a very pro-entrepreneurial, creative, cultural environment. And I think that, when we specifically let's talk about Portugal and a lot of the work that I've done in terms of researching the startup ecosystem, right? And many of the laws that are shifting, I do believe that we are starting to see, specifically with what Portugal has now said with blockchain, right? That it's not going to tax the abundance that comes from blockchain. So that's one example of saying, hey, the Portuguese, at least as of right now, the culture is saying we are going to at least allow this innovation to proliferate. And I bet you that as a result of it, companies will now come here. People will begin to engage differently because of that signal. And I think a lot of that is an example of how the national culture can impact and stir and support innovation.
One more question. Sometimes, despite the individual initiative, we face resistance from people surrounding us. How do you think that we can credibly convince others to embrace this framework, mindset, and change?
Well, To me, and I'm going to speak about my own direct experience, right? Many of you know that in 2012, I actually created a holiday called World Dream Day that's been celebrated in many places around the world. And I remember when I first even took it to my organization, at the time I was working at a Madison Avenue agency, I was a vice president at the agency, and I was telling them about this vision I had to create this day. And some people were like, that just doesn't sound that great. And then years later, one of the executives who was working at another agency came to operate and sponsor it. Now I say this, I wasn't very good at communicating my vision. So to me, one of the biggest things you can do is to begin to get more committed to how you tell the story of your ideas, how you invite people in. The same thing in the startup world and ecosystem, right? If you can't pitch, if you can't convey the story and the possibility, of course, many people will not be able to take that journey within you. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the only problem, but that is where we begin. We start at getting so clear and so synced up with our ideas and the way that we articulate them, we research them, we start to be able to communicate them in a way whereby which they arise as others, as if they want to invest their time, they want to invest their money, they want to invest their interest in what you're up to. So I think the first step is for you to get very good at pitching, telling your story, and articulating ideas.
It's also a communication skill also issue. Last question. If you could give one advice to leaders to empower them to be more confident for the future, what it will be?
I would say if I could give one advice to leaders is to lead from the vantage point of possibility. And it's a frame that I often now am speaking about very often called leaders of possibility. That oftentimes leaders or people who consider themselves to be leaders are like, I am here to lead, but they actually haven't truly stepped into the vision and the possibility that they're leading. When you look at leaders like Mahatma Gandhi, or you look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or you even look at Greta, whatever you want to say about Greta, these are people that are very clear that they are leading a possibility. Again, back to Satya Nadella, he was clear that he had to transform the cultural environment of Microsoft, right? So everything from creating the 1 weeks where the company would shut down and everyone would come together in order to innovate and create internal sprints, that is what it means to truly be a leader. So I would say the advice I would give is really believe in the possibility that you're leading and truly step in and become a leader of possibility, not just a leader. But today we need leaders of possibility, which is a different level of leadership. And it's one that engages, again, individual as well as collective leadership. Because when you are truly a leader, you realize that sometimes it's not about you having all the answers or being the tough guy or tough girl or the one who knows it all. It's truly about how you can convene, how you can collaborate, and how you can support the possibility. And we all benefit from that.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Osioma, for all these informations. I would like to remind everyone that this initiative is part of the Role to Play campaign promoted by NovSPE, and all the videos are available at rolletoplay.novspe.pt. Tomorrow we will come back again with a Singularity University also member. It will be Terry Emil that will be talking about preparing for the new world. Thank you so much, Osioma, once more, and see you all tomorrow.